Welcome to Intelligent Human Leadership, leading yourself and your team. Do you ever find yourself grappling with a lack of confidence in your team? Or battling the relentless waves of concern and fear? Are the pressures to meet client expectations and the burden of missed opportunities weighing you down? On this podcast, you'll discover the strategies and insights that will reignite your team's morale and help you find the harmony and knowledge you seek to propel your business forward. Here, we explore innovative ways to reignite your creative spirit and achieve greatness, empowering you to lead with intelligence, compassion, and resilience. If you're ready to dive deep into your core of leadership challenges and be guided toward success, here's your host, founder of Steward Your Business, David Carr.
Welcome back to the Intelligent Human Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, David Carr. Glad to have you here. Glad to have you back. And I've got some great feedback on our last episode of the podcast regarding balancing short-term problem solving with having flexibility with long-term goals and objectives, and how do we balance all those things? Well, if you're doing that isolated and alone, you're going to have some problems. And so I alluded to, I gave you some specific examples in this last episode. If you missed it, go back, episode 27. There were some great nuggets in there. And I'm going to actually be taking those and taking a number of podcast episodes as we go forward, digging into all those tools. We've talked about the stack before. We've talked about 5 gears. We've talked about know yourself to lead yourself. There's a lot in there. And some of the feedback I got from you listeners, which I very much appreciate, was, hey, David, we want to hear some more application, more personal stories of your journey, and break these down. There's just so much there. So that is what I aim to do. And I really appreciate you guys sharing your feedback with me. It helps me make this podcast more impactful and actionable in your world. Coming from environmental consulting over 20 years, having to learn and navigate this myself, I want to help you be that most intelligent leader. How do you move from being a technical specialist into a management leadership role? Maybe you're moving into a group manager role, something like that, where you're like, man, I've got technical skills, but how do I show up and not only do those, but add to my skills as a leader, as one who influences others? So one way you can do that is through feedback. Now, feedback can be proactive or it can be, kind of accidental or maybe not as intentional as we'd like. What I want to encourage you as we're going to dive into this podcast episode is how can you be more proactive in seeking out feedback and understand and interpret the feedback that's coming back to you. And so that way you can kind of have a maturity and appreciation for the way that feedback is coming to you. Now, I started by example. I reached out to a number of people after my last podcast episode. Intentionally, I sought out people. Now, I didn't always do that, quite honestly, because if I did seek feedback, it was only for people that would affirm me or tell me yes. Now, I want to encourage you as we go into this podcast episode we're going to empower you to listen to other voices. And so we're going to go into the 5 voices framework from Giant, which is a tremendous tool. It's one I use with all of my clients. The one that you can take for free. You might have heard me talk about this in past episodes. stewardyourbusiness.com/5 voices. You can check it out. Or just message me and I'll send you a direct link to do the free assessment. If you haven't heard of this tool before, there's a book on it. There's actually going to be a whole nother training coming out this year that I'm diving deeper in for teams that you'll see coming from Giant. And as a guide and followed along this journey, I can just see how it's affected me personally and it's helped me lead other teams. So if you haven't heard of this, there's 5 voices, as I've been saying. And you're saying, well, who are these 5 voices? And so I'm going to give you a little taste for these. There's a lot more. We can go into them, a lot more. But there's 5 voices. The voices are nurturer, creative, guardian, pioneer, and connector. Now, if you've listened to this podcast for a time, you would know I'm a connector voice, bringing people together. If you listen to my other podcasts, the Business Roundtable, that's where I bring other business owners and leaders together That's what I do. I'm a connector. That's my default voice. But it's not the only voice I have, and everybody has all of these voices. It's just understanding and recognizing what's your natural communication style. Where do you default? What's your preferred way of behaving and showing up versus a presented behavior style, which you may have heard me talk about. Powerality is complementary, similar, but not exactly the same. In the 5 voices framework, we all have these voices, but you usually have 1 or 2 dominant, 1-2 voice order if we go in that way. And so for me, I'm oriented in a connector, creative, pioneer voice with trailing with my kind of blind spot being a nurture voice and my really the end of the spectrum, you may even call it nemesis voice, a guardian. And so when you recognize that you have a voice order, when you get feedback from a voice order that's different than yours, you have to realize that there's different characteristics and ways that those voices present themselves. And so I'm going to dive in here in this podcast episode to help equip you and to start to identify these. Now, you may not know these words because these identifying voices, these might be new to you. That's okay. I want you to hear about the characteristics that should help you identify and receive feedback in a more positive, constructive way, even if sometimes it's not being presented that way, at least from you're maybe realizing that, oh man, I don't know if I'm taking it this way, but I can choose to process it in a different way. So the most common, I'll dive right in there, is the nurture voice. It's the most common voice. Nurturers are amazing. I love nurturers because it's just the name. If you can envision in your mind somebody that really cares about harmony, relationships is the number one priority. How does everyone feel? It's a common thing that you hear out of a nurturer. And so when you think about this and you're receiving feedback, nurturers are also very quiet. So this is important when you're seeking feedback, because if you know you're working with a nurturer, somebody is that way of being, it's important because they're so caring, so positive, generally speaking. They look for relational harmony, that they don't even want to voice their opinions at times. And so seeking feedback from a nurturer can be challenging sometimes. You have to ask them. You need to seek them out. They're not just going to normally just offer it up. And so you may have people on your team where you really would get valuable insight, valuable feedback, but if you're not actively seeking it out, you're not tuned in, so to speak, you may be missing out on a whole portion of your team on their feedback, their understanding. Again, nurturers out of the 5 voices is the most common, dominant. Over 40% of the population is a nurturer. And so you're likely to have at least one, maybe more of them on your team. Remember, it's really important that their feedback style, again, is positive, it's constructive, they value that harmony. And so when we come at them in a supportive manner, we can focus on their strengths and their areas for growth, knowing that they want relational harmony. Now, you may not be included into that sometimes, and this is where we need other voices. If you have all the same voices on a team, what's going to happen is it's going to be hard to get perspective and bring in others and realize, I want to challenge you, if every voice is the same, whether you're using 5 voices or the personalities or whatnot, you're missing an understanding and perspective. A lot of times, like word we talk about today is diversity or equity or inclusion, right? How do we hear those alternate voices? Doesn't mean that every voice that says something is all true and right, but we need to consider those other voices, and we need to listen and learn from where they're coming from. What's their motivation? What drives them? So when you hear about a nurturer, what they're saying is, I value relational harmony. I value care and support. Completely relational. So when you hear about that and you see that that's the lens at which the feedback comes, you can then help better apply that. And we're talking about short-term and long-term goals and all these things. So I want to encourage you and help you to be that most intelligent leader, Now, I've done this and I've learned over years mistakes of not doing that. My biggest mistake was not asking for the nurture. And they were quiet and they were quiet. And oftentimes the nurturer could actually even be burned out. I've had staff members that were very quiet and I didn't realize that. And so it got to a point where they were actually on the verge of burning out and leaving. And so fortunately, there was a place where I could talk with them and open that up. And that was something that I had to do very intentionally and create space too. Sometimes it's either asking or just even creating space and being curious and just listening for little nuances about how they might be struggling with relationships or harmony or connection with others on their team. So I won't be able to do a deep dive in all of these, but I want to give you guys some understanding on the different voices. So that's a little bit of the nurturer. Creatives that's my second voice. And so you may identify as a creative. Creatives are just so innovative, future-oriented, again, pretty idealistic, all the things that can be. And so their feedback style typically is more visionary, big picture. They're not going to get into the nitty-gritty details. That's not where they're looking at. If you can approach them and encourage them to bring out their ideas, maybe provide some constructive criticism to help them refine the vision. This is great. Remember, creatives are going to help you in those long-term visions. So we have some kind of short-term challenges, which nurturers are really good at, and giving you feedback more specifically, where creatives are going to help you on the bigger picture, these longer-term goals that you want to do. And so knowing who is on your team and where you can pull feedback from. It's not that the nurturers won't have that longer term vision, but they're more looking at the here and the now. And so the creatives are more in these visionary innovatives. Think of the Walt Disneys of the world are these creative types, artists, musicians, anybody that likes to be open to new ways of doing things. And I think we all do to a degree. Again, we all have these voices. However, creatives are particularly focused on that bigger picture vision and not so much focused on all the how and the nitty-gritty details. So creatives are a smaller portion of the population. They're very much more future-oriented than the nurturers. And so again, knowing this lens, and I know I'm going quickly here, but I want to at least give you guys all of these voices, so you at least have a foundational understanding for seeking feedback. We'll do a deep dive as we go forward on the podcast to help you apply this even further. So there's creatives. That's we've got 2 down. We're going to cover another one here, the guardian. The guardian is practical. The guardian is detail-oriented and risk-averse. I like to think of guardians to be those that are your accountants or lawyers. They're very clear, precise, detailed, evidence-based feedback. I'm sure you have encountered some of these. I struggle with a lot of these. Oftentimes I would be challenged on my team to give me the specific details. I need the backup for the invoice. I need to see all these steps, and I would be a little lost, and I had to plan and be prepared for their feedback. This particular voice for me personally as a connector is gotten a lot better, but was really hard for me to hear. I always felt very criticized, very critical. And what I realized was they're actually trying to help me. One great story that was relayed to me from another giant guide who's a connector voice like myself was she shared this story about her brother who was seemingly very critical of her. Always, just on her about everything. And she's just said to him one day in early 20s, you just do not like me. Because that's what it feels like as a connector. Sometimes it feels like, man, they just don't like me. It's not they don't like you. It's just that in his words, he said, I see you flying this plane. You're putting this great project together. So again, but I want to make sure you can land that plane. And I want to support you in that way. And this is the way I support you. And this is the way I provide feedback. So recognize there may be feedback that you naturally kind of gravitate to and others that you don't. Doesn't mean one's better than the other. Really want to challenge you in that. Number one, lean into feedback. I think all feedback can be good feedback. You just have to filter through that to have a better perspective and understanding of who it's coming from, right? And so be specific and make sure you provide data to support your feedback if you're giving it to a guardian. So right now I'm talking more about receiving. If we're going to we'll do another episode where we can talk about more about you giving the feedback. This episode, how are you receiving feedback? How are you seeking it out? Talking with these different voices. So we've talked about the nurturer, somebody that's really caring, want to ask and provide a good space for them to open up. The creative, listening and encouraging them to be creative and show their vision and what can be. And we talked about guardians here that provide practical, detailed, information, that they're risk averse. They're going to be looking at all those things when they give you feedback. Now you have to use that as a way of filtering it. It may or may not be applicable. You have to understand where they're coming from, what motivates them. So two more. I've talked mostly about me, connectors, so you guys will know a little bit about me. I'm a network. I'm enthusiastic. I'm relational as well, but relational in a different way than a nurturer typically. I value feedback that acknowledges my connections and my contributions. And so that's what you're often going to hear from a connector, feedback regarding connections, collaboration. And so recognize that you may not be that same voice as me, the connector. You might be that guardian. You're like, I don't know about this relational stuff. I understand. I hear what you're saying, but it's not as important to me. So recognize where it's coming from so then you can implement it accordingly, whether it's a short-term goal, objective you need to hit, or this longer-term vision. And so the last voice I'll just hit briefly here is the pioneer voice. And they're bold, they're strategic. These are ones that are crashing through the jungle. They're making a path. And so they prefer very direct, straightforward, focused feedback. When you get this feedback, when you lean in, when you ask for this, it's going to be pointed. So again, similar to the guardian, not exactly the same, but similar. It's very to the point, bottom line up front. You're not going to get a lot of a paragraph of feedback. Oftentimes a sentence is very concentrated. And we realize when you get that, it can be just as powerful as the nurturer or the connector or the creative or the guardian. These are all different ways that feedback are provided to you. Think about it as you're getting a plate of food. You've got your plate of meat or an entree and a side, and they're all good. They all complement the meal. We need all of those things. They're beautiful. But they all give us different nutrients. They all give us different feedback. They taste differently. And some of them we like a little bit more than others. But this is the power of the voices. They all can benefit us and our teams. So when you listen to these voices and you take the time to dig deeper, and I would love to go deeper, and I will go deeper on future episodes here. I just want to give you guys a taste and understanding of how powerful this framework is. And so many of these other ones I have in these tools. And that's why I created this podcast, because honestly, there's so much I want to give you and value I want to show you. I can't do it all on the podcast, but what I can do is provide a space through Steward Yourself and through Steward Your Business program where I take individuals one-on-one and I walk you through these tools and where you're at on your own journey. It's customized so that it's helping you. There's nothing worse than, I think, hearing a lot of knowledge, information. We've talked about this in past episodes, right? Turning knowledge to wisdom. That's my aim. I want to empower you to invest in yourself today and reap dividends in the future. It's planting the seeds and reaping the harvest in the months to come and years to come. You will actually continue to reap for all of your life. That's my goal. My hope is that what you invest in taking the time listening to this podcast, applying what you're hearing here, you will reap dividends, and together, working together with me, we'll even go further and faster together. That's my commitment. That's what drives me in having you on this podcast. So there's a lot of different ways. We're going to go deeper into this in future episodes, but I want to give you some guidance here on creating some environments or ways that we can help facilitate the feedback, right? This whole episode, we're focusing on how you seek feedback and how you can get that in there. Well, one of the ways you can do that as a leader, or wherever you're at, you have the ability to create influence on anyone, whether you're in the leadership role, quote unquote, or not. find out and look around how you can create a better environment. Look at the voices that you have in your team. And if you're not clear, I come in, I can do an organizational assessment. I can help you identify the team voices and all that good stuff. If you're not clear on your team, remember we talk about on this podcast, know yourself to lead yourself and your teams. Number one, you want to make sure you know what your voice is and how you like to receive information and share it. And then once you understand that, you can find out, are people like me or they're different? How are they different from me? So understand and respect each voice. That's really important. Don't lift up one for the other. Oftentimes you're going to go to the one that you are. And so we want to create and foster a culture of openness where all voices here heard and valued. How much today in today's world do we demonize, we put down one voice, or we want to lift up another? I see it all the time. It's really disheartening, and I don't feel like it contributes to our overall health and well-being. And that's why I want to make sure that you're the healthiest leader in the room. You're the healthiest person. You're helping others. As we talked about that idea of putting on your own oxygen mask first in the airplane scenario. And where I've done this for me, again, it was active listening and being curious and being aware of the team members. Another way you can actually do this is regular check-ins. Do you regularly check in with those people on your team, whether you're, again, on a leader or not? Are you talking with folks? Are you listening for how they approach things and their perspective on things? And don't discount it just because it's different than yours. Now that you know a little bit about the voices, nurturer, guardian, creative, connector, pioneer, got everybody. All of those voices, they help you in approaching these others and, again, asking for feedback. So remember, when we're asking for feedback to get an understanding, a pioneer is going to be different and they're going to be short to the point. Well, a nurturer may be just asking you, as you ask them for questions, they may be like, well, what is it you really need? They're going to want to have more relational harmony with you. So recognize and tailor your approach to each person's primary voice. It's going to get you greater feedback and input than if you just kind of go in there assuming everybody's the same as you. And then, of course, you can do a deeper dive on this, and I can help you guys with any of these things regarding surveys and questionnaires, getting that language dialed in, providing different channels for feedback, even workshops, which I do as part of Steward Your Business. The goal here is I want to empower you to seek out feedback to help you in making long-term goals and being flexible with what you need to be there, of course, and balancing these short-term objectives as well. These will never go away. They're always going to be knocking on your door, as we talked about in the last podcast. But I want to dive deeper here to help you be that intelligent leader. For me, I didn't have these tools when I first was getting into consulting and starting to learn people. And I did DISC, which was all right, but it didn't give me the language that I have now with the 5 voices. This has been revolutionary for me in how I lead myself, because now I know my voice, and it's helped me with my wife. It's not just been in the workplace, it's helped me with my children. But it's something I have to be mindful of and intentional. It's definitely not accidental. I've learned now as I seek feedback, and I heard from a lot of you on my last podcast episode or a couple episodes as I sought feedback. You gave me feedback in different ways, but I was able to receive it in a constructive way. I was able to receive it not defensively, but letting my guard down and be coachable and approachable, because I know I'll be better off in it. And that's where we can go faster together. I can give you feedback, and as I better understand you in the coaching program, that you're not alone and you have support. And that's really what I want to praise. It's not only just me coming into the program, we work together one-on-one, but coming into a community with other like-minded individuals that want to grow, that want to empower themselves in their leadership skills and abilities. So you will be that most intelligent human leader. There's so much more I want to cover, and we will get to this in future episodes. But if you found any value in this as you listen to me as I wrap up the podcast today, please like and share and subscribe. Leave a 5-star review. Reach out to me. Let's set up a conversation and see whether the program that I have and the tools that I have that you're listening here today can really impact not only you, but your organization, the teams, those are the people that are working with you. I do a free discovery call. It's all about finding out and being in alignment. It's all about seeking feedback, and that's where I want to help you. So thank you for listening to this episode of the Intelligent Human Leadership. Until next time, seek out the feedback, become the best version of yourself. I'm rooting for you. Thanks, everybody.